You're listening to The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and related gaming, and the Irish gaming scene, so you don't have to.
Welcome to the party. I'm not Shane.
I'm not Savage. And we're definitely not having an identity crisis right now.
Well, it's a two-header this week, folks, as we are sort of just over the first week of February. And we've decided that, seeing as you liked it so much last time, we would do another news roundup.
Yeah, so it is Demogorgon of wonderful enlightenment.
I've always wanted to be a two-headed beast. I've been accused of thinking with the wrong head far too often, as it stands. But we're just south of the election, which was great fun here in Ireland. We have yet to see any concrete results. But what we can talk about at length and with just as much certainty is the current state of gaming as it stands in the kind of the spheres we run in. And I think the first thing we'd have to talk about is the £800 gaming group in the world, which is Critical Role.
Yes, once again, Matt Mercer and all of his many friends have done something basically on a whim, for something fun to do, and it has succeeded beyond everyone's wildest dreams, and now they're on the hook for one of the biggest products of the year.
Oh yeah, like it's just some fun between friends. They've no interest in this beyond being the funnest guys they can be. WotC have partnered with them to put out a setting book.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's a statement of fact and perhaps an invitation to spit bile or sort of...
I'm afraid, Rick, that you're going to have to provide the bile.
I've got a bucket of it. I have strong opinions on this one.
See previous episode.
But D&D, I know, and this is the one I always wanted to do. D&D, the WotC, Where's is the Coast? Only put out a very few books for 5th ed at the moment. Like they've consciously restricted themselves to 5, 6, 7 books a year, which is a real climb down off where they were. Now, anytime they announce a setting book, that's big news. There's a few settings in D&D that are spectacularly beloved. They get 20, 30 years of history under their belt. And then there's Eberron. When they say they're going to do a setting book, everyone gets really excited. And then they say, and it's going to be the setting book for the popular online role-playing game streamers Critical Role. That's the point where I start spitting dummies. Like, who are these guys that they get a setting book when we're still waiting for so many other setting books for 5th ed?
I could start listing them off right now. I'm still waiting for a Greyhawk book that is more than just 5 square miles around Saltmarsh. And I know there's a massive... there's extremely tiny but very vocal people demanding a Spelljammer book, a Dark Sun book. Okay, but for me personally, my reaction to seeing this, The Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, as is the full title, is good for them. Like, I'm a lot more receptive to a brand new and properly worked out setting than I am, the Rick and Morty make jokes in a book starter set.
Well, this feels like being kicked when you're down because of exactly that. They have pandered now to a bunch of fandoms, if you ask me. I don't think there is anything really more thought out about this than the Rick and Morty book or the Stranger Things starter set. Like, these just feel like they're grabbing at sort of the popular kids' coattails in an effort to seem relevant, which is bizarre given how amazingly popular Dungeons & Dragons is at the moment. I could see why they've got a very good relationship with The Penny Arcade guys, Acquisition Incorporated, which they've also done a book for, and Matt Mercer and the Critical Role crew. But these are not settings that need any help in terms of getting more exposure. And arguably, there's nothing that really sets Matt Mercer's setting apart from any other homebrew. Like, it's not... I'm not exactly reaching for amazing sort of elements of the setting that really make me think, oh, I want to run this over Spelljammer or Dark Sun or any of these really incredible settings that have kept people invested in D&D through the last 40, 50 years. And I think it's exemplified in a really weird way. I'm a designer by trade, so this kind of stuff sticks with me. But it's exemplified by the cover they put out, which is 2 big faces for a setting book. Show me a setting. Don't show me 2 big faces. That's the Hollywood poster version of a D&D cover. Look, just make the faces bigger. It doesn't matter where they are or what they're doing. 2 big recognizable characters. Those handsome people from that show you like watching. I've got no time for this. Like, I can't imagine. Now, obviously, I have not read it. I don't watch Critical Role beyond having watched bits and pieces here and there. But
I can understand the disappointment by more older fans. I don't think this is the hill to die on. I think the hill to die on was the Rick and Morty supplement. At the very least, I'm a lot more receptive to a full campaign setting, even if it is just Matt Mercer makes a slightly on the grimmer end fantasy setting. It's not a joke. It's not a literal joke like some of the other supplements has been.
I agree with that, yeah. Okay, it is at least an honest effort, if not desperately inspired. Acquisition Incorporated is arguably a more interesting setting because it is kind of taking a slightly sort of Brazil, slightly hyper-capitalistic... I mean, we've all been in gaming groups where the adventurers literally tore up the dungeon tiles because they were worth something. And Acquisitions has that, at least. I agree with you 100% in the Rick and Morty stuff. I can't think of a worse fit. It's like, why are we wasting not only pages, but a very, 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 very tight release schedule? Why are we wasting one of those slots on this thing that will never get a follow-up? Like, no one's going to run out and write a bunch of Rick and Morty adventures. At least, no other than Drive for RPG or
my thought is
DM's Guild. Yes.
I think it's sort of, like, as we're saying, it's part of the problem is the release schedule. And when I say that, I don't mean that this very tight and rigorous release schedule is inherently bad. There is a good argument to be made for keeping the market relatively clean, only picking out stuff they really care about. But then they have this high quality, big glossy release schedule, and they fill it with stuff which is just sort of stocking filler stuff, the kind of thing you buy as a lark. There's an awful lot of stuff on the DM's Guild which is high quality and would really benefit from a hardcover release of some sort. And the more humorous stuff like this would possibly be better off put in as a PDF.
It feels like an inversion of where we should be, in that the few releases every year should be really, in a sense, kind of sober stuff, well considered stuff that is designed to last absolutely forever, like foundational stuff for a campaign.
There's nothing wrong with a stunt release
stunts
in a big, wide, we make 3 books every year thing. The occasional joke supplement isn't going to cripple those.
Every month, maybe.
But with the release schedule they've got, some of these things to sort of bring up space. Now, I personally think that the Critical Role book is fine. It's nothing it doesn't look like it's going to be anything exceptional, but it's going to mean a lot to the fans of that, and that has every bit as much legitimacy as the Greyhawk people asking for their Greyhawk supplement, or Dark Sun asking for the new Dark Sun, etc., etc.
Yeah, I guess, look, I'm old and out of touch, and I think that the kids are wrong. I can appreciate that. Like, it's not like Critical Role doesn't have a huge following, but that in a sense brings me to the second part of my gripe about this, in that Wizards of the Coast actually run the risk of surrendering the D&D brand to a sort of a kind of a hostile takeover from inside. If the things you're hosting, if the games you're giving a platform to are more popular than you are, and can command more dollars, more eyeballs, more attention, more of the kind of cultural mind space, then you're at a risk of losing control of your brand. Because people will start to talk about playing, I want to play the Critical Role game, rather than playing D&D. Like, Wizards could very easily, under these circumstances, lose control of the very idea of the world's greatest role-playing game, and it becomes a Critical Role property. I was in Forbidden Planet today, and they've got a very prominent display of, you can go and buy the miniatures for the Critical Role characters. So you end up going, I really want to play as that slightly sarcastic bard, or that half-orc voiced by Joe DiMaggio.
Hello, fellow kids.
Yeah. It seems a bit weird, and I think there's a strong possibility, probably even more so than partnering up with Rick and Morty or Penny Arcade. Like, Wizards could actually find themselves being subsumed into a fandom, and kind of losing the way as a company in terms of what they're going to do with D&D, because they're really, at the moment, like, these are they've had Baldur's Gate announced in the meantime, which is also going to tie into a video game that's been made. But they're far too often, they seem to be making their publishing decisions based on what's popular on the internet. And that is not something you can ignore in this day and age, but you would like to think that you're actually setting the tone or setting the terms of that conversation, rather than simply being thrown from one popular property to the next based on wherever the eyeballs are going. Ideally, the eyeballs should be returning to you to find out what is sort of being endorsed by the company, rather than, Matt Mercer decided to run with your system, therefore you're the next big thing. Or Penny Arcade picked you up, or Rick and Morty thought you're funny, or whatever the next is. BoJack Horseman, the RPG, decides to use the D20 system. Great. Now we're all playing alcoholic, washed-up comedians who happen to have animal heads. Okay, we should probably move on now.
I would love to name this in a positive note, but I certainly think that you are making some valid criticisms, but they should be taken as criticisms of WotC, not of the Critical Role and the hundreds of thousands of very eager listeners who might want an extra podcast in their lives.
If I could annoy 100,000 people, I'd be delighted. But you're right. It's more to do with the choices that Wizards are making, and how these could be quite short-sighted, which I think is really... It's unfortunate, because I think they've made some excellent choices in terms of how they're limiting the production schedule and concentrating on putting out significant books. My worry is that they've become drunk at the wheel and are kind of steering into whatever looks cool, rather than really plotting out a long-term kind of journey. Okay, so that was D&D. Where are we going from there?
We could go on to one of the other big giants of tabletop gaming, Games Workshop.
Yeah, there's never a month where Games Workshop aren't doing something interesting.
Usually raising their prices.
Yeah, okay, it's an expensive hobby, but no one has put a gun to your head and said you had to. No one's put a bolter to your head and said you had to play a Games Workshop game, which is something you discover later on. Once you have kind of racked up a slightly obscene collection of 28/32 miniatures, you then realize that there's other scales, other scenarios, other settings you can play, and it wouldn't necessarily cost you earth. But as a big player in that scene, yeah, it's well worth talking about GW. And in terms of getting into the hobby, we have, since the last time we did a news roundup, I think we have had the release of the Mortal Realms magazine, which is their newsagent-friendly collect a unit every week or every fortnight magazine that they're doing.
Okay, so Mortal Realms is the Age of Sigmar one.
Absolutely
and
correct, yeah.
I think there's another one for 40k. I believe they're based on their starter sets, with the idea being that you could go in and pick up your 50 or 20 or 30 euro starter set. I'm not sure the exact price. Or you could, over the course of 24 weeks...
optimistic. 80? Yeah. 100 euros? But yeah, you can take the magazine approach and you get a bunch of support material. You get, if you subscribe through the postal subscription, you get paints, you get brushes, you get other hobbying tools, you get a bunch of models. I picked up the very first issue because that's always going to be an absolute grab. You're going to get, in that initial issue, you get 13 models. They're
really?
Push fit plastic models. You get a little measuring device, a 12-inch measuring ruler for troop movement. You get a really small playmat to play out your first skirmish.
Huh.
You get some dice, you get some D6, and you get a rundown on the setting and the units that you're going to be playing with, and lovely artwork and all the rest. But the real reason you're plonking down no more than 4 or 5 quid is that you get these models that are really good. Like this, the Mortal Realms issue 1 had 3 of their their hammers, their lightning warriors,
Stormcast Elementals.
Stormcast Elementals, TM registered trademark, which are these great big golden
Land Marines.
Dudes. Yeah, they're lovely. They're giant. They're like 40 mil tall. They're huge, and they each come with their own detailed base, which just makes them bigger. And they're all really cool models. There's 3 of them, and you get 10. What I have to say are some of the finest plastics I've ever seen. Ghosts. Think Scrooge. Think sort of wispy, ethereal thing, clad in a death shroud with chains and sort of pitchforks and rust-eaten weaponry. They're amazing models. This is I was playing with GW models when they were like one pose, and they all had this sort of blocky face forward.
Oh, I had a box set of a few of those, and all the little Gretchens with their coal scuttle helmets.
Exactly. So you get 10 individually posed these ghosts, and they just seem to float off their bases. I can't stress enough how detailed, how amazing, how just technologically impressive these casts are in plastic. Now, it does mean they're incredibly fine. I do wonder at the wisdom of throwing a starter set out there for, because GW want to pick up kids at kind of 11, 12, get them into the hobby, get them spending, get them introduced, and get them committed to a couple of armies. So those are, if you're 8 to 12 or whatever, you're probably going to approach this with more enthusiasm than care. So when you're presented with the sprue of very, very finely detailed models, and I can't stress how, like, we're down to millimeters of plastic here. I think there might be a few wet eyes when, these skeletons snap off at the base, or they lose an arm, or like just chunks and break away. Now the Stormcast Eternals are really meaty. Like they're easy. But anyways, it's a whole thing. It's a system to introduce new players to the game and to the world. Every week you'll get to collect another bit of plastic. They do scenery as well. The scenery they've previewed looks pretty amazing. Like there's a lot of really high. Like GW have done a fine job in producing new, interesting plastic scenery that is very useful on the table. Usually comes with rules now, which is not a thing that would have been a feature in the past. And
unless you buy the Apocalypse expansion book, only $69.99 at your local Games Workshop store.
Well, that I cannot speak to, but it's a good thing. It was very hard to find in stock in the initial week. Like people were just buying armloads of the stuff because it's such a good deal. Now that'll probably level off as the price creeps up to kind of I don't know what the recommended retail price is. I think it's like £8 sterling, which will translate into like £10 or £12 here. And there'll be slightly fallow weeks, I imagine, depending on what your interest is. Ghosts or university reviews.
This week, a small pile of skulls.
Yeah, stuff like that. But yeah, overall, like I think it's... Yeah, so the second issue, you get kind of 4 models, and the third issue, you get kind of 5 models, and it builds out from there, but that initial offering is hugely attractive. So I imagine a lot of people are listening who know what the hell we're talking about probably have a couple of copies of this squirreled away. We've seen things like this from GW before. It's an alternative to going into a shop and dropping 200 quid to get started. So, more power to them for figuring out new, inexpensive ways of getting kids into the hobby. Can't fault them there.
Although when you add up all 37 issues, I'm sure it comes out to a worrying amount in total. But yes, I understand the idea of making it all.
Yeah, but you will have 2 armies and the terrain to play the game with, and a bunch of paints. So, like any way you slice it, if you're in for the long haul, you're probably going to get a deal on it. We saw that with the 40k version they did. Yeah. A lot of people I know have collected it, and they were able to take those models and go and use them in Kill Team and the same with scenery. So there's very complementary things happening in terms of how GW are putting out these starter sets and putting out these ongoing kind of subscription based routes into the hobby that can translate really easily into, you have a playable army that you can take to, just go and buy the rulebook now and figure out what the real rules of the game are. Yeah. And maybe add a unit here and there, and now you've got I don't think I'd ever expected to, at this point in time, be saying, I think GW are doing a really good job, but this is good. Like, this is something I can, and I paid 4 or 5 quid. I can easily hand these off to a 5-year-old. I have a son who's like, yeah, if he breaks them, so what? I'm not out a lot of money. Yeah. I don't feel precious about them. In a sense, these are toys that should be played with until their usefulness is over. Like, that's what they're for.
No, these are adult collectibles. These are part of a serious and very mature game. But yes.
Yeah, you get really sweaty people who kind of treat them that way, but thankfully, there's also this aspect that you just like, here, let's go nuts with this. Let's have some fun with this.
In other news, another 40k news, I believe they're having yet another of their semi-plot-based updates where they just make a whole bunch of new codexes and then call it a storyline, which is it's not the worst way to do it, I suppose.
Well, 40k players have been looking for new codexes as long as there's been water falling out of the sky. There's been a lot more story in Warhammer 40,000 in the last couple of years than there's been in the last 40 years.
Yeah, no, that's true. Although I do feel that they're already starting to repeat themselves a little. Because as far as I understand, the main thrust of this one is that humanity is becoming slightly more psychic. And Magnus the Red, the very angry red person, is up to weird tricks, which I'm pretty sure is Tuesday in 40K First Millennium. I feel like they've gone to this well a few too many times before. Of he does something magical and it's bad, and it's just
that's a major plot point in the heresy storyline. It kind of kicks it off. I don't know if you could say they've overplayed that one. Although what I would say is that it appears to be Primarch of the Week at the moment in terms of returning characters.
If it was really Primarch of the Week, they'd have released new Primarch. They'd have brought back, I don't know, Fulgrim with all of his drugs, or I don't know, Angron in his anger.
Well, he's a demon lord now. That's hardly going to change.
So are a whole bunch of people come back. Magnus is a demon lord. Mortarian's a demon lord. Being a demon lord just means that you're slightly more expensive on the battlefield.
A bigger model.
You're essentially a very hard to paint tank. That's all. I'll be.
What would I say with this? I think, like I've followed the 40k heresy kind of fluff for a long time, a lot longer than I've played the game. Like I was a second ed player, and I couldn't even tell you how the game plays in its 8th edition.
Yeah,
I have no idea, but I can tell you that like I'm fairly up to date on what's been going on in the heresy timeline, what's happening in the Psychic Awakening. Like this Psychic Awakening thing was the very thing that was always a bit of a threat to the Imperium and also the Emperor's Great Hope. So in many ways this feels like the writers over at Games Workshop are thinking about winding up the current Warhammer 40,000 timeline in the way that they did with Age of Sigmar. That, like, if you've got all the Primarchs returning, you have humanity finally going through this Psychic Awakening that would, as far as the setting's concerned, kind of put them on par with the Eldar before the Eldar fell and created Slanesh and basically died as a civilization. Then, and hints of the Emperor returning, like this talk of him stirring on the Golden Throne, all this kind of stuff. This does feel like a bit of a fin de sale moment, that they want to maybe wrap things up, maybe jump, like perhaps they want to look at Warhammer 50,000.
I don't know. It feels like it's pretending to do that, but really it's a particularly it's a change they can modulate so that they can walk it back if they need to, or say it is an ongoing process that will take another 10,000 years. It feels
if nothing else, it allows them to introduce new units or create new factions.
Yeah, I believe the second wave of Psychic Awakening models are Tau, and that they are doing more Tau models, a bigger focus on this sort of burgeoning Tau civil war, as one of their most famous commanders goes rogue and tries to make his own Tau empire. And
I get a Tau split would be really interesting. They've definitely set up another Imperium civil war. because of the new rift that has essentially split the Imperium in two, and the idea that Rabuti Gilliman might kind of reboot the secular Imperium as opposed to the sort of Emperor worshipping Imperium. Like, this is all to play for. The Eldar resurgent, in a sense, that there's a thread of narrative that says that the Eldar could be kind of reborn or revitalized, that they could start to replenish their numbers. Yeah. Not much mention of the Orcs. Orcs don't really feature until you need something big and green to squish.
I feel like they're releasing a new version of the classic Orc Gazgul, Margaret Thatcher. I feel that he's probably going to get a pretty big play because in the time since his last real appearance, there's been an awful lot of building up of the Orc mythos, as it were.
The Beast storyline that they did post-heresy.
Yeah, it's basically like 1,000 years after heresy, how the Orcs almost killed everyone.
Which is a constant threat with Orcs. This will be at least the third reworking of Gazgul.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think perhaps the Orcs could do with a couple of other big figureheads that kind of come out of the setting. Maybe find a few other things to do in terms of how they sow chaos, how they create discord, and generally gum up the plans of just about everybody else. Like, the Orcs they're I always liked the Orcs when they were fun. I'm not wild with the Orcs when they're just serious. But it's always nice to see them kind of showing up in unexpected places doing weird things. Like, there's a lot of potential for them to just interfere. Because what I would say is that... Yeah, what I would say is that a lot of the storyline stuff they have at the moment is the factions operating with intent. You know, the Cadian Gate has fallen, and the Rift is opened, and the Eldar are trying to resurrect a god, and the Primarch's coming back, and these all seem like very intentional moves. The Orcs are always that wild card.
Yeah,
they're the Maverick mode that appears and kind of has the potential to simply reset things, a bit like the Tyranid in that respect. Can push everything back onto the back foot, or just inject a bit of humour into like the thing that people seem to miss most often is just how funny Warhammer 40,000 is.
I guess that is one thing that this new era is missing, is that because it's been all about this sort of hopefulness and, you know, escalating a threat and, you know, pushing the storyline forward, it sort of doesn't have time to focus on the ridiculousness of the setting. I don't think it's necessarily bad to do it this way. I do feel like some people are going to miss where it's just a whole bunch of grim darkness and it's nonsense. It's fun.
Okay, let's push on. I'm watching the clock here, and we do need to keep moving forward because I know we could talk about this all day. But we'll go back to a bit of industry news. I think if we were to, instead of we've talked about two companies that, for better or worse, are nailing it in certain respects. They're certainly bringing it in. But what I want to talk about now is a company that has suffered a closure, and that's Fantasy Flight Games Interactive, who in January of this year announced they were shutting down. Now Fantasy Flight Games and Asmodee, who are a French company, kind of integrated very heavily about 5 or 6 years ago, and that's probably come to the fore as Asmodee have picked up more and more companies. But Fantasy Flight have now been forced to shut a division, which is Fantasy Flight Games Interactive, who were responsible for a lot of the app integrated or tablet integrated games that they put out in the last few years. And I think we should probably just touch on that briefly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it from what I've seen of the releases, I'm not sure it's clear whether this is part of some form of change in strategy or if it is literally about this costs way too much money and it's not making anything. And it's hard to know which it is, because the impression I got from looking at the product line, as it were, of FFI, is that they were more like a support company. They were making the bells and whistles that made different elements of the main company go better. Would that be inaccurate?
No, I think that's fairly on the ball, because if you think about these hybrid board games and card games, things like that, we'd XCOM, the board game, which had a huge app component in terms of a timer and a kind of an AI games master that was pushing events to you. Mansions and Madness, which I had the opportunity to play at GaelCon a few years ago, and it was a bit of an eye-opener for me. It was just such an amazing experience to sort of have your models on the board and be traversing a space and then being fed bits of narrative by the app and seeing, like, it was able to track based on the choice you made. It was able to track where you were and what you were doing. Very tightly integrated. They did something similar for Elder Signs, which was, I think, was a card game based, sort of another Cthulhu style game. More recently, they had a Lord of the Rings license, a computer CCG, in line with something like Hearthstone. But like with the closure now, like that's a lot of stuff that, is it abandoned? Will it continue to be supported? Should you download it now before you lose it forever? I'd be curious to see what happens. And does it mean that they've decided that there isn't any money to be made in this kind of hybrid space?
It could be that. It could be something as simple as they have found a cheaper supplier of game code somewhere in the developing world. Maybe some Brazilian developer is more willing to take French money.
That's amazingly cynical. My hat's off to you.
I don't mean to be super cynical about it, but
you're probably not wrong.
The thing about these kinds of business decisions is that it's very hard to know what the driving force behind them. It could just as easily be office politics in all its pettiness as some stroke of economic genius, some Warren Buffett of board games. It's really hard to know, so we're left sort of speculating. As someone who doesn't collect a lot of board games, I don't have a great finger on the pulse of where these new app-based games not selling or something. I couldn't make this, but my guess would be that they were doing fine, but they didn't catch fire, and that meant that they were. So they were established in 2017, and that's like, if you go to the end of 2019 and then that decision's probably made and announced at the start of this year, that's a couple of years. So I'm just looking at a news piece on gamesindustry.biz, and they talk about how they were established by Asmodee, so sort of taking a piece of Fantasy Flight and sort of going, right, we're going to make an interactive studio here to produce video game adaptations of the Fantasy Flight games that were already existent in board game and card game form. Mm-hmm. They did the Lord of the Rings adventure game, which was launched at PC and then went to consoles in November. And then in the news piece I'm looking at, there's an update for January 8th of this year, which is really no time at all in board game terms. Yeah. And I'm just going to read it out. So, an Asmodee digital representative responded to gamesindustry.biz request for comment, and they said, "We regret
Fantasy Flight Interactive's closure, which will be occurring next month, February. And we would like to thank the whole team for their hard work and the fruitful collaboration we've enjoyed these last years. The Lord of the Rings Adventure Card Game Definitive Edition has been released in December on PC and will be released early 2020 on consoles. We will continue to support the game servers, including co-op multiplayer, beyond FFI's closure, ensuring an optimal experience for players venturing into Middle-earth. Okay, that's fine. I would never buy that. Like, I'm not going to buy into that game now. I know for a fact there's no more updates coming. There's nothing coming. Like, that's dead. And the servers will be shut down as soon as they think that they can get away with it. Like, that, we're gone. So, it feels like we had a brief window. Because really, Fantasy Flight Games are the only people who had the money to do this. It feels like we had a brief window of these hybrid games that were app-based and on the board, and were really richly kind of detailed and tied together and supported with sound effects and voice acting and all these other things. And that's, for whatever reason, I don't know, obviously it's a money thing, but for whatever reason it just didn't pan out. I think we'll probably look back on XCOM and Manchester Madness and things like that and go, wow, that was amazing, but you can't get that anymore. Or somewhere down the line someone's going to pick up the pace there and find a market for these games or experiences
I don't
like
think
this.
This phenomenon is going to go away so much as it is going to lie fallow for a while, and then someone is going to try again and maybe make slightly different mistakes this time. Well,
Different
again,
mistakes are good.
mistakes is a strong word.
I'll speak from life experience. Always make different mistakes. That's the best way to go.
Yeah, no, that's entirely fair. But like, that's a life lesson, not a business lesson.
One and the same. It's,
You'd think that, yet. But yes.
These are people who are learning, who are trying to figure stuff out. Just because they're big companies in this space doesn't mean that they necessarily have all the answers. I'm glad they tried.
Yeah.
Like, they produced interesting things, and I can't fault them for that. But obviously they have to make a business decision, and unfortunately in this case it is to shut down these operations.
But we can turn that around and say, look at some other business decisions in this sort of border between the digital and the tabletop. We have Paizo have licensed another of their Pathfinder adventure paths to become a new isometric RPG game. Wrath of the Righteous, I believe, is on Kickstarter as we record this, and is of course at 1,000% of its target goal and racking up stretch goals, which weren't planned in advance.
That is the smoothest transition I think we've ever had in the show. Well done.
Thank you.
Pathfinder, yeah. I had a play of the second edition a while back. We did an episode on that. I subscribed very briefly at the very start of the Pathfinder series. So when they did their seminal Rise of Giants, Rise of something,
Rune Lords?
Rise of the Rune Lords. I subscribed for that. I still have them on my shelf now, and I dip into them because they're such well-produced bits of kit. And of course,
this is the miniatures, I assume.
No, the books, the Pathfinder.
Oh, you have all the books.
I have the six that comprise Rise of the Rune Lords, and I have the six that comprise Crimson Throne. Mm-hmm. Both excellent. If I'd had the opportunity, I probably would have continued with them.
I believe that they are re-releasing the 6 episodes of Rise of the Rune Lords.
Really?
Yes, there's going to be a collected edition. I'm not certain if it's going to be adapted to second ed. My suspicion is that they should, but I do not remember the details of this collected edition, unfortunately.
Okay. But anyways, they've got video games on the on the roster now, and as you said, it's burning up on Kickstarter.
Yeah, the first one they released, Kingmaker, did rather well. It didn't, get the 90s, but it was definitely one of those 8.8 games that certainly pad out their genre. The isometric RPG is still very much alive since its revival, and the Pathfinder games are very welcome, is the impression I got. And this is going to be Wrath of the Righteous. So, like Kingmaker, it'll have a gimmick. Gimmick is a strong word, but Wrath of the Righteous, I believe, is where Pathfinder tried experimenting with a sort of epic rules, where as well as normal levels, you would gain mythic levels, and these would give you demigod-like powers in order to face a particularly vicious threat.
Is this sort of a leapfrogging into high-level play?
It's more like... It's sort of... But it's more like side extra levels on the side, so you could be like level 5, but you're mythic level 1, so you will have all the powers of 5th level fighter and a couple of god powers as well.
You can sort of bust out once per episode.
Something like that. It depends on the...
That sounds like a lot of fun. That's an interesting way of elevating your play occasionally. I'd have to look into that, but I do like that idea that you could sort of strap on some... you bust out a daily, as it were, if you're going to go with 4th ed.
Yeah.
Kind of taking things. That's cool. You mentioned before we started the show that Wizards were working on a sci-fi property now.
This is a very weird one that's only popped up in the last week or so. As far as we understand, Wizards of the Coast have, through various Hasbro-related means, acquired a bunch of ex-BioWare developers, and there are, as I think I said earlier, there are more ex-BioWare developers running around the games industry than there are atoms in the universe at this point. So I don't think it's necessarily the return of Mass Effect or anything, but the word on the ground is that what Wizards of the Coast are bankrolling this group of developers, and the plan is to create some form of an original sci-fi RPG of some sort. And
a computer game.
Yes, a computer game.
So hold on. The takeaway here is Wizards are taking their D&D money and pumping it into game development in partnership with ex-BioWare people.
Yes, that's, as I said, it's a very weird story, and it doesn't quite flow from an outside perspective. It seems like it's come out of nowhere.
I got a whole bunch of cardboard money that I want to put into digital. That's crazy. Polygon covered this about 2 weeks ago. We're at the very end of January, so not even. And yeah, the studio's called Archetype Entertainment, led by former
Sounds
BioWare
like a video game developer to me.
Yeah, it's pure. It's pure video game kind of hype.
They either make video games or terrible CGI cartoons in the 90s.
So the guy who's heading up, James Olin, he was creative director and lead designer on Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age, Neverwinter Nights, Star Wars The Old Republic, and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. These are some of the absolute top tier properties, the BioWare of old, before they kind of maybe lost their way a little bit. These are the games that everybody fell in love with. If you followed BioWare, this is not a lightweight. This is not a guy who just sort of designed ladders for Mass Effect 4.
Yeah,
this guy was there for some of the games that made BioWare.
And yeah, I mean, I imagine, like, it's certainly a announcement that could lead to all sorts of amazing things. It's more that it just seems so out of the blue, or it seems like there might have been clues that something like this was happening, but they would have been industry gossip rather than announcements, and so this feels.
So would Wizards kind of take this and use it as a template for a tabletop sci-fi game?
10 years ago, I would have said absolutely yes. Modern, what was the Coast? I can see them sleeping on it. I can see them releasing a hot property game, the new, not Mass Effect, but something of, mid-tier standards, something like a Pathfinder game or one of the Shadowrun games, something that really bulks out its genre and gets really good fan base, but it maybe doesn't make millions. And then forgetting to make a game to go with it on the tabletop. I mean, I don't want to come down on Wizards that much, but it is. I want to know more about this. I want to know that they also have a team in one of their offices trying to figure out some way to turn the old Alternity system into something marketable, or anything really. This is like right now. This is just sort of this left field announcement, and it sounds like it might turn out good, but I don't know. I need to see more. I need to understand it. The question that comes up is why WotC? Why is this a Wizards of the Coast company and not a Hasbro company? Because while you can level all sorts of shade at Hasbro being a shady multinational, they are pretty big players in the toy and game industry, and you'd imagine that they, as a corporation, would be more suited to running a video game studio than a collection of people who decide card games and occasionally a D&D supplement.
Okay, well, I think that's a fair point, but I actually think you've kind of answered your own question there, because this is about complexity. So Hasbro as a company, as an entity, would not necessarily be regarded as a place for housing something complex. Like, look what they publish. Like a lot of kids games and sort of board games that go into kind of Christmas stockings, and Hasbro publish like Hungry Hippos, Game of Life.
I think that's Mattel, but
you take my point. Mechanically and rules based, physically even, relatively simple things. Whereas Wizards of the Coast is a place to put something intricate, to put something niche and and genre based. I can see why this makes sense for them to house it there, because there is a cross pollination in terms of we need a game designer to come up with a good in-game economy, or a good stat system for weapons, or a good a new alien race to plug into the game, and if it can bleed out into a pen and paper tabletop experience, or a CCG experience, or a war game, plastic model war game experience, then this is the obvious place to put it. Now, what I do notice is that along with James Olin, they've also hired a guy called Chad Robertson, and the last place he pops up is he was the lead on Anthem, which
really,
yeah. Now, if the last thing on my CV was Anthem, I would absolutely be looking for somewhere else to go at this point.
Fair enough.
It has not performed very well.
The only reason it wasn't the worst game of 2019 is that Fallout 76 was.
There you go. Like you couldn't ask for two more divergent sort of poles in terms of former BioWare employees. So you've got one guy who's been like a lead designer and a creative director on some of the most amazing BioWare games we've ever seen, and then this other poor schmuck who was there as the ship sank. And I'm not going to say it was his fault, but being head of live services for a live service game that absolutely fails to meet any of the sort of business or creative objectives is, I feel like they've hired the best and the worst of BioWare. And I wonder, does that just mean they're going to land in the middle?
Hard to know. I will say, though, you were making the point earlier that that Hasbro could be seeing Wizards of the Coast as sort of their complex game brand. That it would be their holding house for more advanced board games, extra card game stuff, and stuff like their video games division, which that sounds reasonable logic enough to me. But then I thought, didn't they release like an entire Transformers CCG? And I think Wizards only like supervise. I feel like the Transformers CCG was done without any like real anything more than a look over from WotC. And maybe my memory's just weird because I didn't look at it too closely, but my understanding was that the Transformers CCG wasn't under the umbrella of Wizards of the Coast, which, so I don't want to say it shoots a hole into your logic, because it just makes me feel like it's yet more of the sudden swerviness of this business decision.
Well, you have made a huge disadvantage there, because you would definitely be the resident Transformers expert. Although I did hear recently from one of the players in my game that apparently this Transformers CCG has cards that transform, like physically you fold them. Mm-hmm. And I think that is genius. Like, if you think about the lifetime of any given bit of cardboard, and now you're getting players to actively introduce wear and tear to their cards that they paid money for, and presumably at some point we're going to have to replace.
Well, that is that a bug or a feature?
Oh, that's what I would call a recurring revenue generator.
I'm just reminded of
trick.
I remember there was in like the late 90s. I found like in some store in Mayo when I was on summer holidays, I found a bunch of a CCG where part of the gimmick was that there was like scratch card foil over the combat numbers, and every time your card took damage you would scratch off one of the levels, and some cards actually got more badass the more they were wounded, but then they would become unusable when they were at 0 and you'd have to buy more packs.
The bad old days.
90 CCGs, everyone.
Heart pressure's going up. This is no, I can't even talk about this.
Yes, again, there's lots of reasons to be hopeful for this, but it just again comes into this weird sense that I'm not 100% sure that Hasbro know what they're doing with Wizards of the Coast. That there's sections of the game which are doing, sections of the company and the conglomerate that are doing amazing things, but the whole is very scattershot.
Well, I think, look, they form something of a skunk works in that sense. Mm-hmm. If you consider Hasbro as an entity, and then think about what that small slice of the pie Wizards of the Coast must look like.
Yeah.
In those terms, then why not let them do whatever the hell they like? Whatever catches their fancy. Entirely
fair. It's just I'm wondering, are they...
But it means that interesting things can boil up out of that experimentation. Mm-hmm. And it might seem like the whole world to a Planescape fan or a Transformers fan or a Rick and Morty fan. But really, for this company, it's like, who knows where the next major success might come out of. And in the meantime, we can bankroll any number of crazy ideas. Foldable CCGs, or interactive tablet-driven board games based on popular computer games from the 90s, or internet show source books for that little RPG thing that we bought years ago. It's for them. It's like, why not? Like, just make it happen. We're hard at work on the 146th edition of Monopoly. That's going to sell like gangbusters. But we might as well throw some of the money into the skunkworks, the R&D pile, and see what pops out. It just makes sense for them. Which, like, okay, when you realise just how small a part of the entertainment industry this kind of tabletop gaming is, it's liberating in the sense that you're free to do anything. If you're listening to this now, just take your wildest idea and pitch to Wizards of the Coast.
There's all kinds of stuff crossing over. Like, there's Dishonored is getting an RPG, The Witcher got an RPG, The Witcher got a TV show. There's all kind. The party DC Comics are doing a D&D supplement now at some point. There's an Elder Scrolls war game. It is, I will say this.
Hold on, this is where you really kind of wanted to land today, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
so
this is a weird media landscape now.
Yeah.
And in a sense that we're no longer as role players, as tabletop players, as card game players, we're no longer excluded from that wider media landscape. We're actually being embraced because we're just another avenue to try these weird ideas. And as you say, we're now seeing all of this crossover. And the Altered Carbon, which was a Netflix show last year, they've just announced that they're doing an RPG, and that'll be a very cyberpunk, transhuman, eclipse phase style thing.
Yeah.
So it's almost like there was a point in time when your cross-media promotion piece was a Happy Meal or a character-themed cup in Burger King. And now your cross-media promotion piece is an entire RPG, like with hundreds of developer hours put in, and artwork, and a new rule system, and all sorts of craziness. Which, to my mind, is kind of cool.
It is. It's certainly it's reassuring in a way. It's just, it's a big land of experimentation. I just wonder, are people taking the best advantage of it? I feel like some companies are getting it right on. As you say, it may be the Critical Role is getting far more out of this whole thing than D&D ever did. Actually, here's a really good cross-media branding. Apparently, they now have stuff in Hot Topic. There's
they've got hoodies and T-shirts
and rings and necklaces, no doubt.
That's how you arrive, the merch.
Yeah, it's just like, it is there's definitely a showing that tabletop gaming is growing out into the wider medium, and there's more promotion. There's stuff becoming RPGs, and there's RPGs becoming stuff, and it's great to see.
Okay, so that going the other way is the stuff I really want to see.
Yeah,
like there's so many great properties that only exist as tabletop games now that should have a more mainstream presence. Like we talked, I think, before the show about Warhammer 40,000 cartoons and series and things, and they've been tried before. There's another one in the works, I believe.
I can't remember the name of it, but I believe it is being done by the makers of the fan series called Hell's Reach, which has been recommended to me many a time by YouTube algorithms, and I just haven't been in the right grim dark mood to watch it all.
You'll get there. We all get grimmer and darker as we get older.
Fair enough.
And I'd love to see Shadowrun given a really good treatment on the big screen. Like we had that Will Smith movie Bright a couple of years ago, again on Netflix, that was very close to being a Shadowrun movie.
Only being directed by a good person.
Sure, with a decent story and some other stuff. We had, like, Vampire arguably got a great TV show out of True Blood. Like, that was a really, like, they lifted much.
There's the True Blood's more like an unofficial game, TV show. I believe there was actually an official Vampire TV show that got like 3 episodes in like 2002.
We'll see what happens in the future, but I think a lot of the things we talked about now are encouraging. They're not always exactly what we'd like to see happen, but they are at least moves in the right direction. And
I'm trying to be generally optimistic about these weird things coming out of left field. It's wrong to think, oh, they should have done this with it, they should have done that with it instead. Very often it's the unexpected stuff that ends up being more enduring and more experimental. Authentic. Yeah, authentic's a good word. That's probably what I meant to say.
Affecting, experimental. I'm just looking at the clock here. We are way over where we usually go.
Yes.
And
it's almost like we need extra people here to keep editing each other.
To rein us in. But, well, you know what? There's no rules now. We do what we like. So
Liam, come back. We need you so hard.
Let's call it here. Okay? Let's talk to our audience now for a second. We'd love to hear anything you got to say about this kind of episode. Myself and Shane just sat down and just talked about the new things that are happening in January, February for 2020. I'm sure we've missed like a million things. There's so many cool things happening. We've touched on the very, very top peaks.
We didn't even talk about card games or how apparently Goblin with some bondage gear is apparently destroying the meta all over again.
I would need a lot more money before I can talk intelligently about what's happening in card games at the moment. There's so many other things we talk about. But yes, we want to hear. But like, if you've enjoyed this episode, we absolutely want to hear from you. We
absolutely want you to share us on the Critical Role Discord and tell us and highlight the sections where we said that Matt Mercer is a fool and he's trying to steal D&D from us and all these.
A cancer in the industry. Let's get that phrase into the zeitgeist. A cancer in the industry.
A cancer in the industry with incredible hair.
So the thing about cancers is very successful. I do like his hair.
On that note,
we're looking for other things to talk about. We'd love to hear suggestions from the audience. If you'd like to join us in one of these discussions, we'd be very happy to Skype in or get on Google Hangouts and maybe have a chat about anything you want to talk about. We're flexible on all that stuff. Shane, I've had a great time doing this. I think it's great fun. I feel a certain amount of pity for the editor, who is going to have to try and stitch all this together. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, or we'll cross that cross media event when we come to it. But I'm going to hand over to you now. I think you should take us out on this one.
Listeners, I want to say I'm very sorry, and if you'd like to reach out to us, reach out to us on our social media. But for now, this party's over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there or on Twitter through @adventuringpty. The hosts can be contacted by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike, version 3 license.
Okay. So I hit the stop button and...
Let's try and do this together. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, stop.